This movie is about tables and structured references. We're going to begin by building structured references automatically, and we'll turn off the function that allows us to create structured references. It's an option. We can also build structured references manually using IntelliSense, and when we do that, we have several special items that we can include in the structured reference. And we'll look at unqualified structured references, which are structured references that are within the table itself. And when we build these, they'll automatically be copied down the full length of the table in the column, but we can turn that functionality off if we want to. So structured references and unqualified structured references. All this sounds probably a lot more complicated than it actually is. But to begin with, we need to have a table, and I've got a schedule set up with some data. And to convert that to a table, I'm going to select a cell within the range that contains the data, press Control T, and left click OK. So now I have a table. It's called Table 14. I'm going to call it Table 1. But I'm going to leave the sort of generic name table intact because I think it'll help to make clear what's happening with the structured references. So a structured reference is a reference that contains the information necessary to reference the table. And the table has two elements that need to be identified in this reference. One is the table name itself, and the second one is the column. So we're going to build a structured reference, and I'm going to use the sum function to do that. Equal sum tab to pull the sum function into the cell. And to create a structured reference, all I need to do is select one of the columns in the table, and when I get the black arrow that's pointing down, after hovering over the column header, I can left click and create a structured reference. And as I said, the structured reference contains two bits of information. The table name, which in our case is Table 1, and then the column header, which in our case is sales, that's enclosed in brackets. Control Enter to complete the formula, and then pressing F2. What Excel has done is summed the data that's in the sales column in Table 1. Now, we can turn this functionality off. I'm going to escape out of that by going back to the backstage area, Alt FT Options, left click Formulas, and then deselect Use Table Names and Formulas. I'm going to left click OK, so that when we try to create that sum function again, Tab, and I go to select my column that's in my table, I get the cells specifically C4 to C7. So the reference for this sum function is C4 to C7, that range, which is a reference that we may be more used to seeing. But they function the same way, Control Enter, meaning that if the table expands, and I can expand the table by entering, say, May, and row 8 automatically gets added to the table, and I'm going to make up some sales for May, 5,000, Control Enter. Both sum functions were updated. The structured reference was updated, referencing Table 1 and the sales column, and the standard reference was updated as well. So we have the ability to build a structured reference manually by using IntelliSense. And just for demonstration purposes, we're going to use the sum function again, tab to pull it into the cell. Our table is named Table 1, TAB, and there it is. That's enough to display only one selection option with IntelliSense. Tab to pull that into the function. To get the columns displayed, enter a left bracket, and we have month, sales, tax, and total displayed, as well as some special items which we'll cover in a second. Arrowing down to sales, tabbing, we have now completed our structured reference. I'm going to input the other bracket to enclose the column header sales, Control Enter, and Excel will add that other parentheses at the end. The special items, all data headers totals, and this row, allow us different options when we're pulling data out of the table. If I select all, I'm going to tab, input a bracket, and enclose that with the parentheses, I get all of the data that's in the table. Looking down at the status bar, the sum is 39,900, and that equals my sum function where I'm summing all of the data in the table. We also have some other options that we can choose from. In this case, data will give me the same result as all. If I left-click headers and then close that, I get 0 because I can't sum text fields. When I press F2, the headers are referenced in the structured reference, and obviously a sum function wouldn't be used on text fields, but you could use this structured reference in other functions and have it actually produce a result that would make some sense. A VLOOKUP, an HLOOKUP, for instance. I'm going to escape out of that and arrow down and put another sum function referencing our table and choosing totals, closing the bracket, closing the parentheses. In this case, we don't have totals, but we could put them in there. The totals that are being referred to is the total row. Well, I have a total row now, and if I toggle it off, I'll get the error message back in our formula. Toggling it back on, I get the result that you would expect, which is the total for the total row. If I expand the total row to include the other columns by left-clicking and dragging, my formula is increased at the same time. You can see that my formula up here, where it says all, is twice what the total row is, because we're getting a sum of not only the data, but also the total rows. So if I instead change this to data, now we can see the distinction between choosing the special case all as opposed to data. And the last special item is this row tab, and this row is row 7. So I should get a sum of row 7, enclosing with brackets and parentheses, Control Enter, and selecting that row. That is the result that I got. So if I copy this formula down, Control C, down arrow, Enter, I get the total of the next row. So structured references allow us to reference a table and a column, and these special items allow us to refine the references even further. So what's an unqualified structured reference? The qualified structured references are qualified in that they reference a table. An unqualified structured reference is a reference that doesn't reference the table. So when do we use those, or when do those come into play? I took out the total column, and I'm going to add it back. And I'm going to build a structured reference that doesn't need to be qualified, because this structured reference is contained within the table that I'm going to be referencing. That sounds a little circular, but here's what I mean. Equal D4 plus C4, which should give me a total, and when I enter, my formula is automatically copied down the full length of the table. The formula that's displayed in column E is an unqualified structured reference in that it doesn't reference a table, and so the qualification isn't necessary. And if for some reason we don't want the formula to be copied automatically down the full length of the table, we can turn that functionality off by going to Alt-F-T to get to the Excel Options dialog box, left-click Proofing, left-click Autocorrect Options, go to the second tab, and deselect Fill Formulas and Tables to create calculated columns. It's selected by default. If I clear this checkbox, I'll say OK, and I input a formula, I'll add another column, equal, and this formula wouldn't make any sense, but Control Enter, it is not then automatically copied down the full length of the table. So that's structured references. We had a structured reference automatically be created by Excel when we referenced a table in a formula that we were building with the sum function. We found out we can turn that off so that the table isn't referenced, and instead we get the common reference that we're used to seeing. We built the structured reference manually using IntelliSense so that we can see the components of what goes into the structured reference, and also to display the special items, which allow us to draw out from the table subsets of the information and the content that is in the table. We looked at unqualified structured references, which are automatically created when we're working within the table itself, and those functions and formulas that we add in a column are automatically copied down the full length of the table, but that's functionality we can turn off if we don't want that to happen.